Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In this webinar, we will talk about the business value of DevOps. My name is Coco Lee. I am the marketing manager of DASA. I will be your host and moderator of today's webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can submit them in the question box on the right side of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we will take some time to answer as many of your questions as possible. I'm so pleased to be joined by Mark Smalley, our DASA ambassador. Hi, Mark. Thank you for being here today. Can you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Coco. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be one of DASA's global ambassadors. Been that for a while now. Nice people to deal with, and a very interesting topic, of course, the domain of DevOps, which we'll be exploring today. This is the white paper we'll be referring to. You'll find it readily available on DASA's website. And I couldn't resist sharing the picture that we took last year in St. Louis in the States, where I had the opportunity to present the white paper to Gene Kim, who many of you know, I believe, know as one of the front runners in the DevOps community. I just bought his new book, Accelerate, which I can recommend. And I just like to point out how happy he looks with our white paper. So I'm quite delighted with that.
Thank you, Mark. For those of you who join us for the first time, let me do a quick introduction. DASA is an open source association that has built a competence model and accreditation scheme for DevOps training and certification. We are an open and independent association that is working with more than 300 partners that include training and consulting companies, corporates, ambassadors, and content development teams. Organizations use the DASA model and instrument and work together, further enhancing this instrument to support DevOps journey of organization. Mark, now may I hand it over to you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Coco. This is the table of contents of the white paper that I'll be summarizing in this talk, which will take about half an hour, just under half an hour. You can see the various topics that are covered in the white paper. It's about 20 pages in total. I'd like to summarize it by giving the introduction to set the scene, and then talking about the final chapters, which focus on the flow from where things start in the business and where things end in the business, looking at how IT services and the benefits from IT translate into business goals, and in particular, how DevOps contributes to those. So this is the agenda that I'll be following. And you've got as I mentioned before, the white paper is free to download, and this is the site where you can get it. The white paper and the topic of business value of DevOps is framed around two concerns. I've taken the chief executive officer and the chief information officer as the two key players here. The CEO is concerned with making the right investments in the context of the whole enterprise. So he or she has to weigh up the benefits of the various improvement initiatives that are being suggested to him or her, whether they're IT or not. It doesn't make sense to work on something which is not the weakest link in your whole organization. So that's a concern. On the CIO side, often CIOs are struggling to make the IT function more credible, to articulate the value of the stuff that they're doing, in the attempt to be more involved in strategic decision making. And I think it's evident from these statements that understanding and articulating the business value of IT is crucial. So this really frames the white paper and the talk. I've depicted the CEO and CIO here. You can see the CEO instantly recognizable by his very distinguished executive hair on the right-hand side, and the CIO, very young CIO, I might say, on the left-hand side. And the setting is the CIO wants to invest in DevOps and is trying to sell the initiative to the CEO, who says, why on earth should we choose this DevOps thing instead of the other investments that we could make? Does this make sense? And the CIO, you can see, is fairly technical because of the pens in his top pocket and that rather dubious bow tie. The only things he can come up with is continuous containers, immutable microservices, and culture as code, which of course are complete nonsense. That's just techno babble to the CEO. So he says, I don't know what you're talking about. Come back when you speak my language. I think it's too often the case that the business people and IT people can't communicate on the same level. So the paper attempts to explore explore two things. What is the value of IT, and how do you communicate that? How do you articulate that to business executives? And of course, all in a DevOps context. So let's do a bit of thinking about the value of IT, and I'm starting off with some observations from market analysts. The first two are from Forrester and Gartner, and the last two are from MIT. You'll find the exact references in the white paper itself. First one states that more organizations measure IT speed than business value, so it's very much an IT metric. And only 6% of IT functions consistently demonstrate business value, which is not a particularly good score. So there's certainly room for improvement here, and it demonstrates, I think, that people are struggling with this. The two last statements, both from MIT, from different people, illustrate the ever increasing value of technology. Technology gives you the ability to do business significantly differently, or even do significantly different business, because technology makes it possible. And digital in particular, we speak about digital when there's IT embedded in the products or services, or if there's a digital experience that the customer has. Digital is a customer-centric value proposition that redefines a business, possibly even an industry, as we've seen a couple of times recently. So there's some broad statements about about what market analysts say. The summary of the white paper, just to give you the big picture and let you know where I'm going. The conclusion is really that most manifestations of DevOps, so how most organizations do DevOps, contribute to faster, more reliable and cheaper development, and in particular delivery of IT-related services and products. And this business value increases significantly when DevOps teams that have an IT-centric function, focusing on the technology stuff, when they extend their scope to look at the business more. And I'm referring to the term business value optimization. I'll speak about that a little bit later on. That's one of the 8 knowledge areas that DASA has in its competence model. I think it's one of the most powerful things in this particular context. So that's where I'm going with the talk. I'd like to illustrate it with a value chain. I'm calling it a business IT business value chain, because it starts with the business and ends with the business, which I think is the way things should be. And it's based on what you might call a stack on the left-hand side, a stack of components that are interrelated. I think you can well imagine, starting at the bottom, that infrastructure is needed to run applications, that IT service gives the users access to the underlying information systems so that they can get information out of the systems, and that information is used in the business processes. All fairly elementary stuff, but it does enable us to depict this quite, I think, quite neatly. So let's go through the steps. Starting in the business, somebody wants to invest in information and technology. In order to do that, they have to specify the requirements, both functional and non-functional requirements, so that IT service can be designed, so that applications can be developed, can be deployed, and be run. And of course, to develop, deploy, and run applications, you need infrastructure. So infrastructure facilitates those functions, development, deployment, and running. And now we've got a system that's up and running. And we've probably spent quite a lot of time and money on getting the system to this state. The trouble is, absolutely no value has been realized because nobody's using the system. So this is where the interesting part starts. People start to realize value when they start to consume the IT service. They get the information and interpret the information and use the information to take better decisions, better business decisions. But only when they act on those decisions do they get the value that was intended in the first place. And that's a really crucial part. We often talk, we in IT, we often talk about delivering value to our business colleagues. But you don't deliver value, I believe, you co-create value. In the end, it's the users who actually achieve value by using the investment in IT. And I just restate it because I think it's a really important thing to communicate. Value from IT investment is only realized when people act on decisions that have been improved by information that's been correctly interpreted that they've derived via IT services from the underlying information systems. Unless that whole chain's been done, you might as well forget it. If nobody acts, there's no value at all. Now, there are a couple of, this is the mainstream in the value chain. There are a couple of other steps that should be illustrated, I believe. One is to recognize that users need support, not only in the technicalities of using an application, but also in a more contextual, in the business context, understanding how you use the application in the business context, how you interpret the information to take better decisions. So there's support both on the IT side and on the business side. I've used blue to depict IT and green to depict the business in this chart. And the final step I'd like to illustrate is that while IT is doing its stuff, building and running information systems, there's lots going on in the user organization. For instance, reorganizing the processes, training users so that they can use the new functionality. So this is a nice big broad backdrop I'd like to use to illustrate the following. I like to talk about typical metrics that you'll come across in DevOps environments. There are three more or less dev-based metrics: deployment frequency, lead time for changes, and change failure rate. And there's one, the last one, mean time to recover, is more of an ops metric. Just run through them briefly. Deployment frequency refers to how frequently you deploy new software, new releases, new functionality. Lead time for changes refers to how quickly, when the developer has developed the code and has committed it to the repository, how quickly can you get it into production? The third one is change failure rate. When you deploy something, how often does it go wrong or right. And the final one is when there's an issue and we don't have normal service, how long does it take to restore normal service? So mean time to recover, MTTR. So for some people, a recognizable abbreviation. Mean time between failure and mean time to recover are the two main metrics for availability. The focus here is on mean time to recover. And I'd like to focus on the orange one here, lead time for changes. When you realize that the lead time for change it starts when the developer has finished coding and it stops when the functionality is in production. Now that is extremely important, and DevOps communities have made extremely important improvements in that area. But I am equally concerned in how long does it take to develop the applications, to design the IT services, how long does it take to come up with the specifications, and I think this is really intriguing, how long does it take for organizations to come up with an investment in the first place? And I'd like to illustrate that with a topic that you might be familiar with in your organization. I'm thinking about the topic of Agile, and I'd like you to reflect on when your organization started using Agile as a way of working in certain environments. How many years ago was that? Suppose that I've asked this to several organizations, and lots of people say, well, about 5 years ago, it seemed to go mainstream with us. We've been using it since then, 5 years ago. Well, if you realize that the Agile Manifesto emerged around the turn of the century, then you could say if you only started investing in Agile about 5 years ago, you've missed 10 years of potential, because theoretically you could have adopted Agile 10 years earlier. And this is not intended as blame that you didn't do it. This is just human nature. In the beginning, you simply weren't aware, not you personally, you probably would have done it earlier, but your organization wasn't aware that Agile was a state that you could be in. It just wasn't that popular. A couple of years later, you heard people talking about Agile, but you thought, well, that's not for us, that's for other kind of organizations. Then a few more years went past and you started to have doubts. And then in the end, you started to panic and you said, gosh, we've got to go Agile as quickly as possible. And that was 5 years ago. But I think you get my point that there are often latent opportunities hanging around that you're simply not aware of. And wouldn't it be good if we not only focused on that middle bit, getting stuff deployed quickly to production, but also focused on the other areas of the value chain? So that was the point I wanted to illustrate, that we have to look at the bigger picture. I could equally talk about the right-hand side, where the users achieve value. I spoke about it a little bit. There's more in the white paper if you're interested, but for the sake of time, we'll move on. If you've taken a good look at the paper, or taken a good look at research in general on the IT benefits of DevOps, you'll see that the main benefits are faster delivery of functionality, faster and more frequent, that the delivery is also more reliable, as well as the operational IT services, which are more resilient. So if something happens, you can get them up to speed quickly. Again, the IT services are often cheaper, but I'd like to talk about cost a little bit later on. And investments in DevOps often result in a happier workforce. From the start, DevOps has been a very much people-centric movement. putting happiness into the IT environment, making IT a better place to work. Patrick Dubois, the Belgian guy who came up with the term DevOps, said that from the first place. It's about happiness, taking people seriously. And by the way, when he came up with the term DevOps, it more or less emerged by accident. He originally wanted to call it Agile Service Administration, but he thought that term was a bit unwieldy, a bit too long. So he came up with the term DevOps. But it's a warning not to look for too much meaning in the term DevOps. It was coined more or less by accident, or so he says himself. So if these are the IT services, the IT benefits you get from DevOps, how do you translate them into business goals? So let's have a better conversation with the CEO now. So you're back with the CEO again. So what would you tell the CEO? Well, instead of talking about faster IT services, I'd be inclined to talk about quicker time to market of external products and services. If you're talking about internal change, talk about quicker business change. Don't talk about resilient IT services. Talk about fewer costly disruptions to business operations. Talk about a better customer experience. Because as you can well imagine, if your website performs well, that will increase customer satisfaction, give them a better digital experience. Satisfied customers often translate into loyal customers. Loyal customers buy more from you and are often prepared to pay a premium for your products and services. So that translates into more sales and higher prices. Third one, don't talk about cheaper IT services, talk about lower CapEx and OpEx. So use the business language, capital expenditure and operational expenditure. But, and there's a word of warning here, it's good to realize how significant the IT costs are as a percentage of the total business costs, because you're talking to the CEO in this case here, and how important is that? And this varies a lot from industry to industry. I remember vividly asking the question at a conference in Berlin a few years ago, and a guy in the audience, he stuck his hand up and he said, I can tell you how much we spend on IT. It's public information. I work for an airline in North America. He said, we spend 1.5% of our total business costs on IT. 1.5%. Oh, so that's not much. He said, just to put it into context, we spend 40%, 40% on fuel. Oh, wow, 40% on fuel. That's amazing. I never realized it was that significant for airlines. But you sort of get the picture. If the CIO here works in that company and he's talking to the CEO about say he's very proud that he's reduced IT cost by 10%. So the CEO says, well, let's calculate that. That's 10% of 1.5% of total business costs. Of course, all cost savings are welcome, but that's not really significant. You would have a completely different story if you said, let's invest another 0.5%, so from 1.5% to 2% in IT, in order to reduce our fuel costs by 10%. So 10% to 40% is 4%. Now you've got a business case. Unfortunately, the discussions around IT are moving from the cost of IT to the value of IT. So that's good news. And finally, whatever you do, don't talk about happier IT people. It's bad enough that you have IT people, let alone that they're happy. Talk about high performance organizations instead. That is language that the CEO understands. That's MBA language. So now you're on speaking terms. So to summarize this short talk and the white paper, most manifestations and most DevOps teams contribute to faster, more reliable and cheaper development and in particular delivery of IT-related services and products. In so doing, if you just think about that discussion we had this with the CEO, they contribute to a degree, that's an important qualification, to a degree to quicker time to market, quicker business change, the topics that I just addressed. That to a degree can be increased significantly when you expand the IT-centric scope of DevOps that many teams have to include the business context more specifically, more explicitly. And again, I'm referring to that topic of business value optimization, which I now like to position in that value chain that I showed you. What you see here depicted in orange are the 8 knowledge areas of the DASA competence model, the competence framework, that it's often referred to, with the more technical things on the bottom half, stuff like continuous delivery, programming, infrastructure engineering, and at the top end, and in particular, I think business value optimization, that's the key one for me in this context, is being more aware of the value that is being generated through the whole life cycle. That's a key thing to think about. So if you're interested in expanding your scope, business value optimization would be a great topic to take a look at. Finally, before we start finishing it off and answering any questions that you might have asked, this is the competence model. That's a competence model that I referred to with top left in the knowledge areas, business value optimization, as well as the 4 knowledge areas. We have 4 skills areas, and those combined generate that neat little model on the right hand side, a scan of how much experience you have in the knowledge areas and skill areas. And I recommend you considering doing this either for yourself as an individual, or I think more interestingly, doing it for your whole team, because then you can map the team level strengths and weaknesses and decide what you need to work on. It's a free competence, free quick scan. It doesn't take long. And here's the you've got the URL, the link to where you can do it. So I'd recommend that. So with that, I'm going to close the broadcast and see if we can get some kind of interaction. Coco, are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Mark. I see some questions coming in. Let me read the first one. You mentioned lose business productivity as a result of IT issue. How significant is that?
Yes, I spoke about users using the functionality well and interpreting the information correctly, because if they don't do that, you won't get the value out of it. That is particularly significant. What's interesting is that there's been surprisingly little research done on that topic. Just think about this in your own organization, just looking at the users, thinking about the users who you're familiar with. How much business productivity do you think gets lost when IT systems fail? I'm surprised not much research has been done on this. The limited research that I'm aware of suggests that about 8% business productivity is lost due to IT issues. The interesting thing is, half of that is due to technical issues, for instance, a website or an information system not being available. But the other half is caused by users not understanding or using the systems well or misinterpreting the information. So the significance of this, I think this is one of the most overlooked areas in that whole value chain I spoke about. I spoke in more detail about the left-hand side of the chain, the speed with which stuff is developed and deployed. But what comes after development, when the system's operational, I think that really is an area, and I'm thinking out loud now, thinking about the role of the product owner. Product owners often focus on the functionality of the system, ensuring that the development team builds it well. I think that the product owner should extend their scope to think more about how the users are actually using the system, whether they are realizing the value. So I think that's a key point to think about. How do you help users realize value? I hope that's addressed that business productivity question.
Okay.
Any other things?
Yeah. A happier IT workforce was one of the benefits of investing in DevOps. Is that just nice to have, or is there more behind it?
Yeah, well, I made a bit of a joke about having happy IT people, but this is deadly serious. It's been well established, and this is not only in the IT industry but outside of the IT industry in general. If you have a high trust work environment in your company, whether it's IT or not, that doesn't matter. That correlates very strongly with superior financial performance. So on the stock market, your shares you will have higher shares if you have a high trust work environment. There's been some serious research on that. If I think about the more targeted research in the DevOps area, the annual State of DevOps report, I forget which year it was, several years ago now, but I assume it's still valid. They discovered that companies that had high performance were the employees were twice as likely, I think it's 2.2 times more likely to recommend their place of work to their friends or industry colleagues. So this is a pretty significant thing. Happiness. We should take happiness seriously. I think that's a nice title for a blog I might write.
Okay.
I think we're running out of time. Maybe just one more question we could take.
Okay. You highlighted business value optimization as one of the DASA competences for people to take a look at. Are there any other ones that contribute to business value?
The first one that comes to mind is business analysis. I think that's very closely aligned with business value. But I think about not only the knowledge areas but the skill areas. Hopefully you'll recall I talked about the competence model. It comprises 8 knowledge areas and 4 skill areas. I would highlight courage. Courage was one of the skill areas, and I'm thinking in particular about the courage to stop activities that aren't as profitable as you thought they were in the first place. So you've started off a couple of projects or a couple of work items, a couple of backlog items. You've given them a certain priority based on the cost of delay, based on how much value they'll generate at a certain time. But during the execution of those work items, you come to the conclusion that one of them, which had a high priority, is not a high priority anymore. You should have the courage either to kill it in favor of something else or delay it. So I think that's possibly the final point I'd like to share. Have the courage to revisit the initial prioritization and look at the whole and reprioritize when necessary. I think that's the important thing. Be brave. Final words. Be brave.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. After the webinar, we will send you the slides and the recording. If some of you still have questions, just send us an email. We would be happy to follow up for you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Especially thank you for our presenter, Mark Smalley. Thank you. We wish you have a great day.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks. Bye now, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.